Well, folks, it is time. It's Thursday, and the Courier team is here. We want to talk about a couple of things that we saw in the news this week. Thank you so much for joining us again. We had a whole bunch of you join us last week, which was super cool. And yeah, we're back again. With me is V. We have two hosts because two is all we need. V, say hi to the people.
Hi everyone, I'm Vee. I'm a software engineer at Courier, and I'm super excited to talk to y'all today.
Ugh, I'm so glad. I'm so hype for what it is that we're getting to talk about this time. Which is I'm just going to make sure that we're actually working on LinkedIn. Yes, we are working on LinkedIn. Awesome. So we're streaming to LinkedIn and YouTube. And if this intro drags a little bit, I'll be able to cut it out of the later YouTube replays, which is cool. I just figured out how to do that this week. So
Nice.
we have a couple stories to talk about. I titled this broadcast like Real Talk About Burnout. That'll be, I think, maybe the second or the last story that we talk about. The first one that really spoke to me was this Tim McNamara story called 1X Programming. And this came up in my Hacker News feed, and it just really, really spoke to me. I'm gonna share it up on the screen. You got a chance to check this out before the show. Did you have like initial thoughts about it?
Uh, I thought that it was interesting, and I like the concept of using programming as a tool to accomplish like some goal, and without that context or that problem you're trying to solve, programming can feel a little. For some people, it can feel a little pointless. But for me, what was interesting when I was reading this is that like I find a lot of joy in programming just a program.
Mm-hmm.
But any given time, I'm still trying to solve a problem. So like I haven't really um, like
Like,
it's only been very textbook problems where like I've programmed just for the sake of like programming.
yeah, and I think it is interesting because he does talk in here like, hey, there's these common misconceptions, and so it's very relatable to look at it and be like, well, I don't have those common misconceptions, or like, hey, your experiences are not relatable. Like I don't
Mhm.
necessarily relate to that. So taking it through where it starts, right? It starts. I'm sure you have heard this more than I have. Is like, you know, in I first heard of it in the synopsis of that book, the Mythical Man Month, which gives you a sense of how old it is that it refers to all labor as a man hour. But um, in the same book that lays out some sort of very common misconceptions and corrections about what it's like to work on a software project, it also just mentions in passing, hey, there's such a thing as a 10x developer, right? Which is like when some people, it was based on this study where some people were measured, asked, go ahead and do this project, and some people, there's variation around a particular speed. Some people are 1.1 times, 0.8 times, but there were some people who could do all these tasks 10 times as fast. And that this kind of led to this perception that a lot of software teams were made up of kind of a bunch of normals and one major league baseball player, right? Where it's just like completely out of the park, super super good. And this led to a lot of problems in the management of software teams, frankly. That there was a lot of like questing for like the genius programmer rather than supporting the team that you did have. And this article isn't about that. This is about how to be a regular programmer. But I think it is sort of pointed at maybe some people who feel like I should be doing just totally amazing stuff all the time. And I mean, I think maybe this isn't that relatable to you because you do a lot. You do a lot and know a lot. So like maybe your problem is not feeling like, oh, I'm not doing enough. you know.
No, no, I actually really struggle with that a lot. So if I'm not coding on the weekends, I feel terrible sometimes. And I'm
Uh-huh.
like, oh, I should be learning a new programming language. Like right now, I've been going through learning Rust right now for like ray tracing because I'm really into computer graphics. And I wrote a ray tracer in Python, but it just renders images far too slowly. So I was like, okay, let's do it in Rust. And when I don't work on that side project over on the weekends, I feel very guilty. I'm like, well, you're not coding enough and you're not learning or pushing yourself enough. And this is not going to help you like be better in your career if you don't like have the side project. So I feel like an immense amount of pressure from myself to always be programming or always code, even during my free time. So even when I do have free time, I'm still like slightly stressed out that I'm not like, if I'm not coding during that free time, I'm like, well, you could be learning something new, but you're not. You're playing DDR.
Wow. Wow.
So I struggle with that.
I actually did set up this stream as an intervention for you. Like, we've actually brought in a few of your loved ones, and who would like to speak first? V, your inability to operate without workahol has little workaholism joke. So yeah, I mean, I think, you know, I definitely had a stage in my path in tech where that was absolutely the case. I was working on weekends. I was working on hackathons. One year I did, I think, you know, 7-8 hackathons, you know, each one either being weekend or week long, and just absolutely spent myself completely, you know, on these things, you know, working 30 hours in a weekend on some project, totally killing myself, you know, exhausted the next week, exhausted sometimes for weeks afterwards, you know, trying to really, really up level myself constantly. And I think one of the points here is that kind of being able to chip in a certain amount of performance every day is a lot more important than the ability to, like, you know, grab this new thing and this new tool. And it's funny, this guy actually, Tim McNamara's big claim to fame is that he wrote the like major Rust reference book. And it's like, it's not O'Reilly, you know, it's the other people. Sorry, I'll share a link to Tim's book in the chat here. It's actually on sale right now, so we'll be sure to share it out there. But yeah, so you know, I think that we both acknowledge that, like, it's possible to do that stuff to keep expanding your skills, but it's probably not necessary to contribute to your team. And probably these other skills are a little more critical than being like a programmer who's using every new technology under the sun.
I would agree with that.
Okay, I took a long time saying that, but I think let's talk through these principles here. Now, you always do a really good job of this, and so this is what I think a lot of people could get to, is the idea that, like, software is a team sport. Like, are there times when you've, like, run into, like, the countervailing attitude or had to remind yourself of this?
I think earlier on in my career. So I think that a sign of like someone that is more of like a junior engineer is their inability to collaborate and ask for help.
Yeah, I think that usually is like a thing that marks out like a lack of experience, is like not being ready to ask for that help. Sorry, I like spaced out for a second. That was what you're saying, right? Is like often starting people are like kind of worrying in silence.
Exactly. Like when you're early on in your career, like you feel like maybe the bar is really high and you have to prove yourself and you don't want to ask questions because you don't want to seem like you don't know enough, or like you want to establish a good reputation, a good rapport with your team, whatever the case may be. I felt like earlier on in my career, I was more reluctant to ask questions, but I realized I was only doing myself a disservice. And 9 times out of 10, the questions that I was asking, everyone else had those same questions, but people were asking them maybe in private, or they were just not asking them because they were worried what other people would think of them.
Yeah. So one of the things that really stands out to me is I've certainly been guilty of this, where, you know, maybe if I was, you know, working on something on my own, I would just say, hey, you know, I don't need to comment on this because I'm working on my own. And maybe it's like a hackathon project where I knew the code wasn't going to be reused. The person, therefore, who suffered from my lack of team spirit was me, right? Like it's an old tired joke, but it's still true. Like if you ever wanted to travel in time and fight a past version of yourself, like programming may be for you, right? Like the number of times that you leave comments and the person who benefits from them is you, right? Like it's impossible to remember how these machines worked, right? So
I agree with that.
Yeah. Yeah, it can be so rough trying to do it on your own. But yeah, so then the last thing is, you know, I've definitely had this conversation with junior developers where they say, hey, I've been working on trying to figure this out for 7 hours, you know?
Time box it.
Yeah.
Literally, yeah. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, tell me how you do that. Like talk to me about the strategy.
Like this strategy for me is like, I will say, I'm going to spend X amount of time on this. Usually I give myself an hour. an hour to 45 minutes on something. If I'm stuck for a full hour, I will raise my hand and ask for help.
Yeah.
If it's something that I think is even like something really small that I should know, 30 minutes. If I'm still stuck, I will post, and I try to post in like a public channel, like engineering or something, that'll literally, so everyone else can see it, and there's a thread, and then when someone else has that same question, they can go back and reference that.
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And I think, I've seen you demonstrate this, and it's frankly quite laudable. It's one of the ways that I talk about myself being very good at the stuff that I do now is I was like, there's just somebody spamming in the chat. So I just want to just pull that out real quick. Remove that. Remove that. Cool. So that's exactly the problem. When someone says, "Hey, I've been stuck on this for 7 hours," I think often their fear is that I'm going to say, "Oh, you're too much of a dum dum, right? You make too many mistakes. You don't know enough, right? You're not smart enough, right?" But in fact, what I'm going to say is, "Yeah, you didn't time box this. Like, this is obviously a problem that someone here could help you solve." It's very often like, "What does this code do that we have that's existing?" Right? So it's like, "Hey, you really should not have beat your head against a wall for that long." This even comes up now with writing. Like, I'll have contract writers who are working on stuff for us, and I'm like, "Hey, don't wonder endlessly like what the benefits of our company's product are if we happen to be mentioning that in an essay. Like obviously I can help you with that, right? And in just a few minutes, right? Like if you hand me a 2,000 word essay that has a couple points of like, say something about Courier here, like say more about, SQL optimization here. It's like, yeah, I can do that, right? So it's fine if you spend 20 minutes looking up more references, but yeah, if you spend hours, that's not right. So yeah, I've definitely experienced that as well. So learn through mimicry. I think there's like, that's like, okay, this is, I don't know. I think maybe this one is like, I don't know that that's super controversial advice, right? Like, don't try to blaze your own path. I think that totally makes sense.
I think that makes sense, but like when you learn through mimicry, like you have to be really careful with that, because if you're gonna go on a little rampage and do copy and paste, you better believe you just copy and pasted that same bug that was introduced. So you have to be really, really like mindful of those things.
Yeah, no, I think, saying, "Hey, look at a standard library," that makes sense. But I
Absolutely.
think, when you say, "Hey, I'm just going to go grab a Stack Overflow ticket and just grab the code from there," that maybe is a little more questionable. I think maybe one way to put this is that, super duper upvoted Stack Overflow code or code within someone else's project is probably a little better, at the outset has a little better than just you trying to make up an answer on your own, right? It's not certain to be like the right thing, but I think maybe there's a sense of shame there for a lot of junior devs. And here we get to the issue of like, you have to know that you've experienced that shame or that like hesitancy. Like, oh, people say I'm good, but I really just use code from elsewhere. It's like, well, that is kind of the job. And that's the one that I think really matters. He is down here is like, hey, a lot of programming consists of gluing together calls from to library functions, right? Like it's not about, hey, I know how to like write this in the most optimal way. And this is I hope this isn't news for a lot of people watching this. I hope this doesn't feel like absolutely surprising. Is like, hey, a lot of this is correctly working with existing code, not hey, writing your own library to do something.
Yep. Don't reinvent the wheel if you don't have to.
Yeah. You'll even see in some programmer communities, I guess I'll say this, like these call outs around like, why are you using an npm package for this? Like, why are you using a package like left pad or underscore or whatever? Like these very sort of packages that are doing very small things for you, right? That you absolutely could re-implement yourself. And it's like, yeah, because that's the job, you know. Like if you have this habit to be like, oh yeah, I need to add like left white space to a string, and I don't want to do it in a memory intensive way, I'll just grab this library everybody else uses. Like, yes, that library is only 100 lines of code, and you could totally do it yourself. So, like the next time that same person with those instincts does that, they'll be saving you weeks or months, right? So they did that. Yeah. Okay, time to fix things now. You're paid to build. Now, the one that I really liked was this guy. API beats algorithms. This is like something that absolutely I have experienced, right? Is like, hey, when you are a well implemented and easy to use API is a bunch more important than the performative, how well your code performs. Have you've seen this, I think, in some of your experience as well?
Yeah, I think that there's a whole science behind designing like a good API. And I think that some of the key things is that you want it to be like ergonomic, you want it to be like easy to consume, you want it to be like well documented, you want it to be flexible, you want it to be backwards compatible, you want to have basic things in there like pagination and sorting and versioning and all of that. They're just like key concepts. But I think that that trumps that's more important than like some sophisticated algorithm that you came up with.
Yeah, I that definitely feels like quite applicable to a lot of people's experience. Like, and I think the secrets of Courier, right, can be easily laid bare here, right? That when I try to explain to someone, why they should be using Courier, a lot of it is about ease of use for your whole team, right? Much more so than, hey, we're going to send push notifications or email notifications, this many milliseconds faster than just using Twilio directly or Mailgun directly or what have you, right? Like, it has a lot more to do about ease of use and the fact that you can expand and contract your usage really easily, rather than saying, oh yeah, our algorithm for like sorting priority is this much more performative than this other one. Sorry, performant, not performative. I'm using the wrong adjective there. But yeah, this one just really spoke to me, and I'm definitely going to like highlight this in a later piece. Was there other stuff you saw here that stood out to you?
Mm, let me scroll through it real quick. Oh yeah. Um, no, I think you touched on most of it actually. Like there was one thing that said like simplicity really helps.
Hmm.
And I think we sort of like already alluded to that. It's super important to keep it simple. Don't like over like I want to be very clear that over architecting or over engineering something is a form of tech debt too.
Yeah, I absolutely, I totally feel that, where it's like either over preparing for the future, or I've seen this stuff where it's like, um it's code that's very short and I'm sure very effective, but there's some things I've seen as like JavaScript examples where I'm like, I still don't know what that does. you know
Yep. Yep.
like, yeah. And even something like, like case statements are often not at all the most compact or like short way to write something, but they are super clear, like they're very clear, right, to see like what is going on here. And so using like complicated fall throughs and NAND gates and stuff to be able to like determine your case, instead of just saying, hey, there are 12 possible cases here, here's the outcome for each of them, right? Like that's meaningful stuff. And yeah, simple enough for the junior programmer who doesn't like you can understand it. Yeah, and I think that he may have meant doesn't think like you, or doesn't, whatever else, but maybe it just doesn't like you, can understand it. And that does stand out, that like most of the code for your team, for people to collaborate on, it is really important that it's something that they can just understand.
Absolutely.
All right, so that's a good one. Again, I'll put the link to uh uh Tim's book into the show notes down below. I will say that there was this thing that I'd actually never thought about, which was called internals, plumbing, and porcelain. So it's like porcelain API versus plumbing API.
Oh.
Yeah, and uh it's sort of the idea that like low level commands do not need to be as accessible, right? They can be more powerful and have a little less things like clear feedback, super high usability. Appears to be kind of the concept there. I'm gonna have to read more about it because I didn't actually follow this link before the show when I was reading the article. But yeah, I might come back to this. It's like plumbing and porcelain is like really an interesting idea. Where like you might be thinking about how like, hey, this one kind of command, instead of returning like some useful like error message each time, like it just expects you to have this stuff formatted exactly right, because it's just used like between teams here. We have clear internal documentation. Whereas like if you're saying, hey, come experiment with our API, right? Obviously, this is a Courier example, right? It's like if this is not something used internally, then we want it to be super duper easy for people to understand and get useful, error messages out of and all that. It was an interesting idea. We'll look at it another time, but yeah, it seems like a good one.
Yeah, that sounds like a good one.
So next, and I know we're not going to have as much to talk about here, but this is this Axios article about drowning in spam. And what's wild to me is this only starts back in 2021, but talks about the billions of texts and calls that people are receiving in the U.S. Yeah, I mean, I'm sure you're totally familiar with like every unidentified number you received a call from turns out to be some kind of robocaller. Yeah.
It's pretty bad. Like I think I probably get like 3 robocalls a day and maybe like 5 or 6 spam emails.
Uh-huh.
And I'm fed up.
Yeah.
It's just gotten worse. Like within this last month, it's just been noticeably worse.
Yeah, and it's notable how bad it is, and I really highlighted this article because, obviously this is we work in this notification world, right? Courier is not particularly targeted at people who want to send 100,000 messages for whatever reason, right? It's sort of targeted at people who have software that's trying to communicate to other engineers is a big part of our targeting. But it is worth covering that. One of the things that I notice when I go to talk about notification infrastructure is a lot of people are just saying like, oh, I just don't want any notifications anymore. They just don't want any communication, anything like that. And that this is stuff to be aware of because, alert fatigue can come from a lot of places. It could come from your software being too chatty, or it come from the fact that everything that this person gets is too chatty, right? They get 100 emails a day, so they don't want another email no matter how useful it is.
Yeah, that's a really good point. That's a really good point. And I think we actually do a really good job with our APIs because we do allow it to be very flexible. So if you don't want an email, you won't get an email. Like you can set your preferences, but like it is challenging when people don't want any form of notifications.
Yeah, and I think that's like it was interesting to see. Like I posted a little bit of stuff on Hacker News, and some people would come back like just like I want no notifications. I don't want to know anything. It's like, well, I want to figure out how to be useful to you, and part of that is multi-channel, is being able to say, hey, is there some place where notifications feel easier to accept, right? Because I know a lot of us have, like, I have all email notifications turned off. Like I'll sit down and see notifications when I see them, but I'm not gonna get those on my phone, right? So if a bot needs to tell me about some critical failure, it has to be via Slack. It's not going to be any other way. Am I going to get it? I suppose that's sort of a Courier thing, right? Is to make multi-channel a lot easier to implement.
Exactly.
So that was kind of a quick one. I will say that they kind of soft pedal in this how badly the FTC has its role to play in here. I absolutely remember when FTC and FCC regs, and literally people from those organizations would get you in trouble immediately for doing this kind of stuff, for running robocaller scams and stuff. And yeah, since about 2015, that has just completely fallen apart in the US. And so, like individual stuff you can do to do that is pretty limited. Like it obviously requires regulatory work. And it's very, very wild that you have this many scam messages going out on a system that we pay for, right? That our money pays for. It's not a private system at all, right? But whatever. That's its own topic. Okay, so last one for today. This okay, well, I guess I had one other thing, which was this thing on the golden age for computer architecture, which I saw and I really liked and I wanted to share. And then I was like, wait, what exactly am I trying to do on a live stream about this? Like, this is an hour and 20-minute video about the history of microprocessor evolution. So like, I don't know, I'll share it in the show notes. Check it out. It's very interesting. It's very, very interesting. I think it acknowledged something that we're all aware of, which is that like most PC architectures that we have not gotten faster and faster, right, in the last 10 years or so. And so the expectation from our software is that they will, right? Our software is getting more and more demanding. But yeah, like the microprocessor revolution is largely like grinding to a halt. So that's notable. I mean, it's interesting to think about. I don't know if it needs to say much more than that. Okay, so now on to the real one. This is this article. I almost want to read it in full, but here's a line like, I can't even stand checking my emails anymore, but I manage a team of 5 amazing devs who clearly started to notice something wrong. The job, the people, the tasks are great, so the problem lies somewhere else. How can I manage responsibilities and deal with this at the same time? Should I delegate my work to someone else for a while? Should I just take a couple of weeks vacation? I'm lost at the moment, right? So this is this person who's experiencing burnout, but they feel a lot of loyalty to their team, and so they don't know what to do. Kind of spoke to me, right? Kind of spoke to me.
It's interesting. I think it's super important when you're feeling this way to be honest with your team and not drop any balls, because you're only doing them a disservice and yourself by concealing this and not getting what you need, like getting the help that you need so that you can feel productive again. So imagine you're leading a team and they all have deliverables and they need your input for those deliverables, but you don't feel like you're at capacity to contribute. Then you're essentially blocking them from getting things done. And like, I feel like as a manager, one of the primary jobs of a manager is to unblock their engineers, to enable them to do their best work.
Yeah. So this is an interesting one in that, one thing that does kind of stand out is saying, hey, I love this team. It's a great setup. It's a great environment for me. But yet you're feeling this way, and it doesn't sound like anybody on your team knows that you're feeling this way.
This is a red flag to me, though, honestly, because you can love like the people that you work with and you can have a great team, but this speaks to the culture of the company that you don't feel safe to come out and talk about this, that you haven't seek that help.
Yeah. And it is really good seeing that, hey, you're seeing a therapist, you're working on this thing, but yeah, you're really down in it, right? If you'd rather like watch Netflix than do any of your work, like you're really down in those feelings, and I think, again, it's good that it's good work. I'm sure it's well compensated, it's all that good stuff, but if it doesn't sound like you're even feeling the space to say, hey, I'm having an off day, much less, hey, I'm not feeling motivated to do this part of the work, so that definitely, takes some investigation. I as far as specific advice, oh boy, who knows, right?
Right.
Yeah, as far as specific advice, it's very tough. And what is really tough, and I'm not gonna soft pedal this one to people, right? This person is a manager of a small team, as I am and have been before. And I'll tell you something, like when you're an IC and you leave, usually your org is going to be okay. It really should be, if you have good policies in place. In a large enough corp, you can absolutely very correctly feel like, boy, if I'm not here, they're really not going to have somebody as good at all, right? And I've seen more teams, shrink and disappear and go down to nothing when a manager leaves than literally any other change, right? Like big mergers and other changes don't affect people as much as just, hey, that direct team report is gone, So I understand the pressure. I really do. What advice do you have when someone says, hey, should I take a few days of vacation? Should I, how can I help soothe myself a little bit? What advice would you give them?
I would first ask them, or I would encourage them to understand the root cause of their feelings, because you take vacation for 2 days, you come back and those feelings are still going to be there. You're still going to be not happy to write code. Like, yes, you just delayed that, but you have to understand where those feelings are coming from so that you can tackle that. If that's that you're not feeling like you're doing work that adds value, maybe you feel like you're doing mundane tasks. Maybe your work feels really tedious. Maybe you feel like you stopped learning and you're not growing anymore, so you don't want to do that. Like, it could be many of those things, a combination of all of them. And if you take vacation for a few days, that's going to help you to like clear your head and maybe figure out what that root cause is. But that's not going to help you solve that problem. Those problems will still be there when you get back if you don't address it.
Yeah, and actually, there's something that really stands out to me in this piece where, this person talks about they worked on some side projects, helps, but I also lost motivation on those. And I guess one of the reasons maybe this stood out to me is that I experienced the same thing. And I also had a time when I was really struggling. I was lead on a team. I was doing a bunch of team management and team motivation, but I still mainly worked, writing code every day. And I was like, oh boy, what is wrong with me? Why can't I just enjoy this stuff? And I really learned that what I had actually enjoyed about doing software was like solving new problems. And the reality of like pushing features was not something that I liked at all. Like, I didn't like digging through other people's code and figuring how to implement X, Y, and Z. I didn't like the fact that, every feature I implemented, there'd just be a new stack of features on there. I didn't control the business direction at all. And this is going to be bummer advice for this person or anyone else in the situation. My only solution was to stop. Right. I had to look at the other roles that were out there that used my tech knowledge that were not pushing features every single day. And for myself, I think I observed correctly. I think this person's experiencing it too. Moving up in the hierarchy is very often not the way to do that, right? Because even if you're managing and stuff, like a lot of these roles, like you still got to be coding, every day, right? Or doing QA every day. That's until you're very, very high up, that's going to be a pretty daily task. So, in my case, I would work at developer relations. I'm the head of developer relations at Courier, right? Like, that change was partly about chasing stuff that I really enjoyed, but also it's about like, hey, I can't keep doing the thing that I'm doing. So that was tough. I think that required some introspection into the past to say, what did I really like and what did I dislike about stuff I'd done in the past? And it's great to be working with a therapist. I think one question is, is the work that you're doing with that therapist like going into this? Yeah. There was on our mental health talk, we talked about EFT versus like emotional versus cognitive behavioral therapy. And so, maybe we're doing too much of one and not the other, right? Maybe we're not thinking about the very basic like rewards and habits of our daily life, or we're not thinking enough about like the emotional connections that our emotional connections that our work has. So it's worth thinking about. On that super bummer note, no, we need to think of something else. Vee, what do you want people to do? We want people to check something out online. Do you have a SoundCloud album that's dropping? Do you have some DDR pro tips you want people to check out on Vine.com?
I do have some DDR tips for people,
What would you say is the most important rule to really being great at DDR?
Oh, do not compare yourself to others. Your DDR journey is yours and yours only, and it's going to be unique to you. So if someone's out there and they're getting perfect scores on a level 18, but you're only doing that on a level 12, that is okay.
Yeah.
Like, that is totally okay.
Wow. See, I was really hoping that you'd be like, oh, remember to get the right footwear. And I would be like, incorrect. The most important rule is to have fun. But that was what you said. So,
Yeah. Just have fun. Like, the moment that DDR stops being fun for you or anything that you do, then take a break from it and figure out something else. Like, I take breaks from DDR all the time and I come back to it.
Yeah. Yeah, I think, we talked about like, the time boxing and advantages of having a little bit of experience. And one of the things that really helps me is that most of what I do, I'm able to put myself when I'm doing something else, when I'm flipping through TikToks or watching TV, I'm like, oh, it's very easy to see like, oh yeah, I'm actually bored of TV now. And I want to go back to like writing stuff or doing work or like being on stage, And so it's nice with your hobbies too, to be like, hey, I want to have fun with it. There's a really cool therapist on TikTok. I should find a link to it. Where he talks about evaluating yourself for ADHD with games. And he says like, oh, like you stopped gaming for a year because you decided to do some Twitch streaming and it started to feel like work and then you didn't love it anymore. Huh. Interesting. Like, oh, you stopped 12 games at the same point where they all got kind of challenging. Huh. Interesting. interesting that you would feel that way, and it's like, oh yeah, you can kind of evaluate these same patterns that maybe you have in other parts of your life. Oh, fascinating.
Oh, that is interesting.
Yeah, no, on that gaze within your soul moment, I think we'll close it up. Folks, check us out at courier.com. Find us on Twitter at TryCourier. Find me at serverless_mom. Vee, other places you want to be found beyond VBot2?
LinkedIn. You can find me on LinkedIn as Vitasha White, or you can find me on Twitter. That's
Speaking
the only
of which, I gotta friend you on LinkedIn because I can't add you as like a participant to these shows. Like there's a listing of like who was in this show, in this live stream, and we're not connected to LinkedIn, so I gotta do that. I'll do that after this call. Thank you for reminding me.
Okay.
As for me, send me a Twitter DM. If you want some Courier swag, you know what to do. Just get in my Twitter DMs and we'll do it. Thank you so much for joining us, everybody. We will talk soon. Feel free to like and comment on the video. If you have questions for us to cover, I'll try to get back to all the questions on last week's videos. They were great. I appreciate you all so much. Be well, folks.